Nina Borowski works as a social worker in Brooklyn. She helps people cope with life's difficulties and lives alone in a cozy apartment. Her half-sister Constance is married to successful businessman Sidney Miller. Constance and Sidney organize a dinner party at their home, to which they invite friends, acquaintances, and family members. Among the guests is George Hansen, a young junior high school teacher. He comes to the party with his partner, Robert Jolie, a doctor. At the party, Constance tries to introduce Nina to suitable men, believing that her sister needs a serious union. Nina, tired of the family pressure, starts a conversation with George. In the process of communication, it turns out that George will soon have to look for a new place to live, as Robert does not want to continue their life together. George didn't know this yet and is upset. Nina, spur of the moment, offers him a spare room in her apartment. George thanks her for the offer. A few days later, George arrives with his belongings and moves into Nina's apartment. They quickly find common ground, become friends, and spend evenings talking, walking, and watching old movies. They both begin to feel comfortable living with each other. George is recovering from his breakup with Robert. Nina finds support in George, especially amidst her relationship difficulties with her boyfriend Vince. Nina and Vince's relationship becomes increasingly strained. Vince is often dismissive of her feelings, intolerant and selfish. At some point, Nina discovers that she is pregnant with Vince's child. She informs Vince that she is pregnant. Vince, shocked by this news, proposes marriage, but Nina feels that marrying him would be a mistake. She decides to refuse his proposal and plans to raise the child alone. Nina shares her plans with George. He offers her his help, promising to be there for her and support her. Nina agrees. They continue to live together, building a household together and preparing for the baby. As time passes, Nina begins to see George not only as a friend, but also as a potential partner. She remembers his stories about the girl he met in his youth and begins to hope that their relationship can grow into something more. George, on the other hand, sees Nina as a close friend and does not notice the change in her attitude. One day, after an evening at the movie theater together, Nina and George find themselves alone. They kiss. At that moment, the phone rings. Robert calls George and offers to spend the weekend with him. George, hesitating, accepts the offer and leaves. George visits Robert, but realizes that there is no longer the same connection between them. At Robert's party, he meets a young actor, Paul James. There is an immediate sympathy between them. George spends the evening with Paul and realizes that he wants to continue his relationship with him. At this time, Nina goes to the country house of Constance and Sidney. However, she does not feel comfortable there. She feels pressured by the family, especially when it comes to the future baby. Nina decides to return home earlier than planned. She calls George and asks him to pick her up from the bus station, but he refuses, citing being busy. Nina returns to the city on her own. At the bus station, her purse is stolen. A policeman named Louis helps her get home. A slight acquaintance develops between them. After returning home, Nina realizes that her relationship with George has changed. She feels a sense of loneliness. George spends more and more time with Paul, arranging meetings and dates. Thanksgiving arrives. Nina hosts a holiday dinner at her home. She invites George and his new acquaintance Paul. Paul comes along with his friend and mentor Rodney Fraser. Nina, George, Paul, Rodney, Constance, and Sidney gather around the holiday table. The atmosphere at the table proves to be strained. Rodney anxiously observes Paul's infatuation with George. After dinner, Paul stays the night at George's house. Rodney expresses his displeasure at Paul's estrangement from him. George and Nina have an argument. Nina accuses George of abandoning her in her time of need, and George accuses Nina of not accepting his life as it is. Some time passes. Frank, George's brother, gets married. Nina and George attend the wedding. There they discuss their relationship again. Nina confesses to George that she is in love with him. George replies that he loves her as a friend but cannot reciprocate her feelings. After the wedding, the relationship between Nina and George finally escalates. Nina gives birth to a baby girl whom she names Molly. George visits Nina at the maternity hospital. Vince comes to the hospital to see his daughter. He wants to be a part of her life. Nina makes the decision to ask George to move out of her apartment. She realizes that for her peace of mind, it is better for them to live separately. George is at pains to accept her decision. 8 years pass. George becomes the principal of an elementary school. Molly attends the school. George puts on a school play in which Molly participates. Nina attends the play with Louis, with whom she is now in a relationship. Paul, Rodney, and George's other friends are also in attendance. After the play, Nina, Molly, and George go for coffee together. Molly refers to George as Uncle George. They walk down the street, talking about the previous play. Despite their changed circumstances, a warm bond remains between them.